The blizzard hit Centralia, Montana on Christmas Eve of 1883 with a fury that turned the already bitter December night into something almost biblical. And Theresa Franklin knew if she did not find shelter within the hour, she would die alone in the snow just like her husband had died alone in that mine collapse 3 months prior. She stumbled through the white curtain of falling snow, her thin coat doing almost nothing against the wind that cut through the fabric like knives. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, and now her feet were beginning to lose feeling too. She had been walking for what felt like days, but had probably only been since mid-afternoon, when the stagecoach driver had put her out at the last stop before Centralia, telling her he would not risk the horses in weather that was clearly turning dangerous. He had pointed her toward town, said it was only 5 miles, and left her there with her single carpet bag containing everything she owned in this world. 5 miles had become an eternity. The road had disappeared under the snow. The light was fading fast, and Theresa could barely see 10 feet ahead of her. Her lungs burned with each breath of frozen air, and her legs trembled with exhaustion. She had no family waiting for her in Centralia, no job secured, nothing but a rumor that a seamstress shop might need help. She had sold everything back in but just to afford the stagecoach fare, desperate to leave behind the memories of James and the life they had planned together. Now she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Her last mistake. Through the howling wind, she thought she heard something. Voices, maybe. Or perhaps it was just her mind playing tricks on her as the cold seeped deeper into her bones. She forced herself to keep moving, one foot in front of the other, even though her body screamed to just lie down and rest. She knew what that rest meant. It meant not waking up. A light flickered ahead. At first, Theresa thought it was a hallucination, but as she struggled forward, the light grew stronger and more defined. A building. A real building with windows glowing warm and golden in the gathering darkness. She could hear voices now, clear and real. Singing. People were singing Christmas carols. She stumbled toward the sound like a moth to flame, her frozen fingers clutching her carpet bag. The building was a church, she realized, a small white structure with a cross on top that was barely visible through the snow. Light spilled from every window, and the sound of the congregation singing, "O come, all ye faithful," seemed like the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Theresa reached the steps and nearly fell trying to climb them. Her legs would barely respond to her commands anymore. She grabbed the railing and hauled herself up, then pushed through the door into a wall of warmth and light that made her gasp. Every face in the church turned toward her. The singing stopped mid-verse. Theresa stood in the doorway, snow melting off her coat and forming puddles on the wooden floor, her lips too frozen to form words even if she could think of what to say. A woman in a dark blue dress rushed forward. "Good Lord, child, you are half frozen to death." She grabbed Theresa's arm to steady her as Theresa's legs finally gave out. "Henry, help me." A man hurried over, and together they supported Theresa, guiding her toward the wood stove that stood in the corner of the church. Other people crowded around, their faces full of concern. Someone took her carpet bag. Someone else draped a heavy blanket around her shoulders. A cup of something hot was pressed into her hands, though her fingers were too numb to properly grip it. "What is your name, dear?" the woman in blue asked. She had a kind face, lined with age but soft with compassion. "Theresa," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Theresa Franklin." "I am Martha Hayes," the woman said. "You are safe now. We will take care of you." Over the next hour, as the Christmas Eve service resumed around her, Theresa slowly thawed. The feeling came back to her fingers and toes in painful tingles that made her wince, but she welcomed the pain because it meant she was alive. Martha stayed beside her the whole time, making sure she sipped the hot cider slowly, rubbing circulation back into her hands, asking gentle questions about where she had come from and where she was going. Theresa found herself telling this stranger things she had not planned to share with anyone. About James and the mine collapse. About selling everything to leave but because she could not bear to walk past the mine entrance every day. About the seamstress job she hoped to find in Centralia, though she had no idea if it even existed. "You poor dear," Martha said, her eyes glistening with tears. "To lose your husband so young and at Christmas time too. How old are you, child?" 22, Theresa said. James was 24. We had only been married 8 months. Martha squeezed her hand. "You will stay with us tonight. We have a small house, but there is always room for someone in need, especially on Christmas Eve." "I could not impose," Theresa started to say, but Martha waved away her protests. "It is no imposition. It is what the Lord expects of us. Besides, you cannot go anywhere in this storm. Listen to that wind." Theresa did listen, and she heard the howl of the blizzard outside intensify. The windows rattled in their frames. She knew Martha was right. Even if she wanted to find somewhere else to stay, she would not make it 10 feet in that weather. When the service ended with a rousing rendition of Joy to the World, Martha's husband Henry loaded Theresa's carpetbag into their wagon. They bundled her in more blankets and drove through the storm to their small farm on the edge of town. The house was modest, just 4 rooms, but it was clean and warm and filled with the smell of pine from the small Christmas tree in the corner of the main room. Martha made up a bed for Theresa on the sofa near the fireplace and insisted she eat some stew left over from supper. Theresa had not realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She ate ravenously while Martha and Henry sat at the table and talked quietly, giving her space, but making sure she had everything she needed. That night, lying on the sofa with a full belly and warm blankets tucked around her, Theresa stared at the dying fire and thought about how close she had come to death. If she had not found the church, she would be buried in a snowdrift right now, frozen solid, not to be found until spring. Instead, she was safe and warm, cared for by strangers who asked nothing in return. She fell asleep thinking that maybe, just maybe, coming to Centralia had not been a mistake after all. She woke on Christmas morning to the smell of coffee and bacon. Martha was already up, humming carols as she worked in the kitchen. When she saw Theresa stirring, she smiled. "Merry Christmas, dear. How are you feeling?" "Much better," Theresa said, and it was true. The cold had left her bones, and though her muscles ached from the long walk through the snow, she felt more rested than she had in weeks. "Thank you so much for taking me in. I do not know what would have happened if I had not found the church." "The Lord guided you there," Martha said simply. "Now come eat breakfast. After that, we need to figure out what to do with you." Over breakfast, Henry mentioned that the boarding house in town might have a room available, though it was not cheap. Theresa's heart sank. She had exactly $7.32 to her name. That would not last long if she had to pay for a room and meals every day. "What about the seamstress job you mentioned?" Martha asked. "Do you know who might be hiring?" "Not exactly," Theresa admitted. "I heard from someone in Butte that there was a dress shop in Centralia looking for help, but I do not know if it is true or if the position is still available." "There is Mrs. Abernathy's dress shop on Main Street," Henry said, "though I have not heard that she was looking for help." "It would not hurt to ask," Martha said, "but that can wait until after Christmas. Today you will stay with us and celebrate. I will not have you worrying about work and money on the Lord's birthday." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes at their kindness. "You have already done so much." "Nonsense," Martha said briskly. "Henry, go fetch some more wood for the fire. Theresa, you can help me with the pie if you are feeling up to it." The day passed in a warm blur of cooking and quiet conversation. Martha and Henry had no children of their own, Theresa learned, though they had been married 30 years. They had built their life together through hard work and faith, and they seemed content with what they had. They asked Theresa about her life before James died, and she found herself sharing happy memories for the first time since the accident. Talking about the good times hurt less than she expected. In the afternoon, a neighbor stopped by with a basket of rolls and some preserves. Martha invited her in for coffee, and the woman, Mrs. Peterson, listened with interest as Martha explained about finding Theresa at the church the night before. "Oh, you poor thing," Mrs. Peterson said. "What a terrible ordeal. Are you planning to stay in Centralia?" "I hope to," Theresa said. "If I can find work." "What kind of work are you looking for?" "I can sew," Theresa said. "I made my own wedding dress and most of my clothes. I was hoping to find work as a seamstress." Mrs. Peterson's eyes lit up. "You know, I heard just yesterday that Mrs. Abernathy is looking for someone to help in her shop. Her assistant got married last month and moved to Helena with her new husband. Mrs. Abernathy has been doing everything herself, and she is not getting any younger." Hope flared in Theresa's chest. "You think she would consider hiring me?" "I do not see why not, especially if you are as good with a needle as you say. She is particular about her work, though. You would need to show her you can meet her standards." "I can do that," Theresa said, feeling more confident than she had in months. "When should I speak to her?" "The shop will be closed tomorrow for Christmas, but she will likely be there the day after, taking stock and preparing for the new year. That would be a good time to call on her." After Mrs. Peterson left, Theresa helped Martha prepare Christmas dinner. They had a small goose that Henry had been saving, along with potatoes, carrots, pie, and the rolls Mrs. Peterson had brought. It was a feast, and as they sat around the table to eat, Henry said grace, thanking the Lord for the food and for bringing Theresa safely to their door. "And please watch over this young woman as she starts her new life in Centralia," Henry added. "Grant her strength and courage and help her find her path. Amen." "Amen," Theresa echoed, her throat tight with emotion. That night, lying on the sofa again, Theresa thought about everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She had gone from nearly dying in a blizzard to being welcomed into the home of strangers who treated her like family. She had gone from having no prospects to having a real lead on a job. It felt like a miracle, and for the first time since James died, she felt something that might have been hope. The next day was quiet. The snow had stopped, but it was still bitterly cold and they stayed inside most of the day. Theresa helped Martha with household chores and started to feel more comfortable in their home. That night, Martha brought out a worn leather case and opened it to reveal needles, thread, and scraps of fabric. "I am not much of a seamstress myself," Martha said. "But if you wanted to practice or make something to show Mrs. Abernathy your skills, you are welcome to use these." Theresa spent the evening working on a small embroidered handkerchief, stitching a delicate pattern of holly leaves and berries into the corner. Her fingers moved with the old familiar rhythm, and she lost herself in the work. When she finished and showed it to Martha, the older woman gasped. "That is beautiful, Theresa. Mrs. Abernathy would be a fool not to hire you." The morning of the 26th dawned clear and cold. Henry hitched up the wagon and drove Theresa into town. Centralia was larger than she had expected, with a main street lined with shops and businesses, side streets branching off into residential areas, and the church where she had found shelter standing at the north end of town. Snow was piled high on either side of the streets, and people were out shoveling walkways and tending to business. Henry pulled up in front of a neat storefront with a sign that read, Abernathy's fine dresses and alterations, in elegant script. Theresa clutched her carpetbag, which now contained the handkerchief she had made and a few samples of her other work that she had managed to save from Butt. "Good luck," Henry said. "We will wait for you at the general store." Theresa took a deep breath and pushed open the door. A bell jingled overhead, and she stepped into a world of fabric and fashion. Dresses in various stages of completion hung on dress forms around the room. Bolts of cloth lined shelves on the walls. The air smelled of sizing and lavender. A woman emerged from a back room. She was perhaps 60 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that took in every detail of Theresa's appearance in an instant. "May I help you, Mrs. Abernathy? My name is Theresa Franklin. I heard you might be looking for someone to help in your shop." Mrs. Abernathy's expression did not change. "Where did you hear that?" from Mrs. Peterson. "I just arrived in Centralia a few days ago. I am a seamstress and I am looking for work." "Experience?" "I have been sewing since I was a child. I made my own wedding dress and most of my wardrobe. I can do embroidery, alterations, and full garment construction." Theresa opened her carpetbag and pulled out the handkerchief. "I made this 2 nights ago." Mrs. Abernathy took the handkerchief and examined it closely, holding it up to the light from the window. She studied the stitches, turned it over, ran her fingers over the fabric. After what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "This is good work, neat even stitches, good eye for design." She handed the handkerchief back. "What else do you have?" Theresa showed her the other samples, including a collar she had tatted and a small embroidered pillowcase. Mrs. Abernathy examined each piece with the same critical eye, asking questions about techniques and materials. Finally, she set down the last sample and looked at Theresa directly. "I will be honest with you, Mrs. Franklin. I am particular about my work. This shop has a reputation for quality, and I will not compromise that. I need someone who can follow instructions precisely, work efficiently, and maintain the highest standards. I also need someone reliable. My last assistant was good at her work but constantly late and prone to gossip. I will not tolerate that." "I understand," Theresa said. "I am a hard worker and I take pride in doing things right. The work can be tedious. Hems, seams, mending. It is not all the glamorous work of creating new dresses. I do not mind tedious work. I find it soothing, actually." Mrs. Abernathy studied her for another long moment, then nodded. "Very well. I will give you a trial period. 1 month. You will work 6 days a week, 8 in the morning until 6 at night, with an hour for lunch. I will pay you $8 a week during the trial. If you work out, we can discuss a permanent arrangement and better wages. Does that suit you? $8 a week." It was not a fortune, but it was enough to pay for a room and meals with a little left over. Relief washed over Theresa. "Yes, that suits me very well. Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. You can start tomorrow. Be prompt." Mrs. Abernathy's stern expression softened just a fraction. "And Mrs. Franklin, welcome to Centralia. I hope you will be happy here." Theresa left the shop feeling like she was walking on air. She had a job. A real job. She found Henry at the general store and gave him the good news, and he congratulated her warmly. "Now we just need to find you a place to live," he said. The boarding house had a room available, but as Theresa had feared, it was expensive. $2.50 a week for the room, plus another $2 for meals. That would take most of her wages, leaving her almost nothing to save. But it was not as if she had much choice. She was standing in the boarding house parlor, about to agree to the terms, when a voice from behind her said, "Excuse me, but I could not help overhearing. You are looking for a room." Theresa turned to see a young woman about her own age with auburn hair and green eyes. She wore a practical wool dress and a friendly smile. "Yes," Theresa said. "I just got a job at Mrs. Abernathy's dress shop and I need somewhere to stay." "I have a room," the woman said. "Well, I have a small house, really. Just 2 rooms and a kitchen. It is not much, but it is clean and warm. My husband and I moved here 6 months ago, and we had been renting both rooms, but our tenant just left last week to go back east. I would be happy to rent the room to you for $1.50 a week. You would have to take your meals with us or make your own arrangements for food, but you would have your own space and privacy." "That sounds wonderful," Theresa said, hardly daring to believe her luck. "My name is Theresa Franklin." "I am Sarah Mitchell," the woman said, extending her hand. "My husband is Caleb. He works at the lumber mill. We are just starting out ourselves, so we understand what it is like to be new in town and trying to make ends meet." They made arrangements for Theresa to move into the room the next day, and Sarah gave her directions to the house. When Theresa returned to the Hayes farm and told Martha and Henry about the job and the room, they both looked delighted. "It sounds like everything is falling into place for you," Martha said. "We are so happy for you, dear." "I could not have done it without your help," Theresa said. "You saved my life and you have been so kind to me. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "You do not need to repay us," Henry said. "We were happy to help, but you are always welcome here. If you ever need anything, you just come and find us, all right." "I will," Theresa promised. The next morning, Henry drove her into town with her carpet bag and dropped her off at Sarah's house. It was a small wooden structure on a quiet street, simple but well kept. Sarah greeted her at the door and showed her the room, which was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a chair, and a window that looked out onto the snowy street. "It is perfect," Theresa said. She settled in quickly, then walked to the dress shop and started her first day of work. Mrs. Abernathy put her to work immediately on a pile of mending, and Theresa lost herself in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. The work was indeed tedious, as Mrs. Abernathy had warned, but Theresa found it comforting. It gave her something to focus on besides her grief. The days fell into a pattern. She would rise early, eat a simple breakfast, and walk to the shop. She would work all day with a break for lunch, then return to her room in the evening. Sometimes she would have supper with Sarah and Caleb, who were warm and friendly and seemed glad of the company. Other times she would take a solitary meal in her room, enjoying the quiet. Centralia was beginning to feel like home. 3 weeks after she arrived in town, on a cold January afternoon, Theresa was working on a particularly intricate alteration when the shop door opened and a man walked in. She glanced up from her work and felt her breath catch. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar. He wore the rough clothes of someone who worked outdoors, sturdy trousers and a heavy coat, but he moved with an easy confidence that commanded attention. His face was tanned and weathered, with strong features and eyes the color of a summer sky. He took off his hat when he saw them, revealing more of that dark hair, and nodded politely. "Afternoon, Mrs. Abernathy." "Good afternoon, Mr. Foster," Mrs. Abernathy said. "What brings you to my shop?" "Do not tell me you have ripped another coat." He grinned, and the expression transformed his face from handsome to something that made Theresa's heart skip a beat. "Afraid so. Caught it on a fence post. I was hoping you might be able to patch it up. Let me see the damage, Mrs." Abernathy took the coat he handed her and examined it, clicking her tongue. "Mr. Foster, you are hard on your clothes. This is the 3rd coat I have mended for you this year." "I know, and I am sorry. I try to be careful, but ranch work is not exactly gentle." "I will have this ready for you in 3 days. Mrs. Franklin, please make a note of this order." Theresa looked up from her work, and for the first time the man's eyes met hers. Something passed between them in that instant, something electric and unexpected. His eyes widened slightly, and his easy grin faded into an expression of surprised interest. "Mrs. Franklin," he said slowly, as if testing how her name felt in his mouth. "I have not seen you around town before." "I just arrived a few weeks ago," Theresa managed to say, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "From where?" "But, long way to travel in the middle of winter. What brought you to Centralia?" "I needed a fresh start." He nodded, and something in his expression suggested he understood about needing fresh starts. "Well, welcome to town. I hope you are finding folks friendly. Everyone has been very kind." Mrs. Abernathy cleared her throat pointedly. "Mr. Foster, unless you have other business, I am sure you have work to get back to." He took the hint and put his hat back on. "Yes, madam, I will come back for the coat in 3 days." He tipped his hat to Theresa. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Franklin. You as well, Mr. Foster." After he left, Theresa tried to focus on her work, but she found herself thinking about the cowboy with the blue eyes and the easy grin. She had to remind herself sternly that she was still in mourning for James, that she had no business thinking about other men, especially not men she had just met. But she could not deny that she had felt something when their eyes met, something she had not felt in a long time, maybe something she had never felt, not even with James, though that thought made her feel guilty. "Mr. Foster is a good man, Mrs. Abernathy said, her voice breaking into Theresa's thoughts. "He runs the Foster Ranch about 5 miles east of town. It was his father's place, but his parents both died of fever 2 winters ago. He has been running it alone ever since, and doing a good job of it from what I hear. He is well respected in town." Theresa wondered why Mrs. Abernathy was telling her all this, but she did not ask. She just nodded and tried to concentrate on the alteration in front of her. 3 days later, right on schedule, Mr. Foster returned for his coat. This time, Theresa was ready for the impact of seeing him again, or at least she thought she was. But when he walked through the door and smiled at her, she felt that same jolt of awareness, that same strange flutter in her chest. "Afternoon, ladies," he said. "I am here for my coat." Mrs. Abernathy retrieved it from the back room, and he paid her the fee. As he was leaving, he paused at the door and looked back at Theresa. "Mrs. Franklin, I was wondering if you might be attending the church social this Sunday. There is a gathering after services every week, nothing fancy, just coffee and conversation. It is a good way to meet folks." "I had not planned on it," Theresa said, caught off guard. "You should come. Everyone would like to meet you properly, and the ladies always bring baked goods. The pie alone is worth the trip." "Perhaps I will," Theresa said, though she had not been to church since Christmas Eve. She had been avoiding it, not wanting to face all those people and their well-meaning questions about her past. "I hope you do," he said, and then he was gone. That Sunday, Theresa found herself getting dressed for church. She told herself she was going because it was the proper thing to do, because she needed to become part of the community, because Martha and Henry would be there, and they would be happy to see her. She did not let herself think too much about the fact that Mr. Foster would be there too. The service was similar to the one she remembered from Christmas Eve, though the church was not as full. Afterward, people gathered in the church hall for the social. Theresa hung back, feeling awkward and uncertain, until Martha spotted her and drew her into a group of women. Everyone wanted to know how she was settling in, how the job was going, whether she liked Centralia. Theresa answered their questions as best she could, feeling overwhelmed by their friendliness. These were good people, she realized. They genuinely cared about her well-being. She was talking with Martha and a few other ladies when she felt someone's presence behind her. She turned and found herself face to face with Mr. Foster. Mrs. Franklin, I am glad you came, he said. Have you tried the pie yet? Not yet. You have to. Mrs. Henderson makes the best apple pie in Montana. He gestured to the table laden with baked goods. May I get you a slice? That would be nice, thank you. He returned a moment later with 2 plates, each holding a generous slice of pie. They found a quiet corner to sit, and for a few minutes they ate in companionable silence. This is delicious, Theresa said finally. Told you. He set down his fork and looked at her directly. Mrs. Franklin, may I ask you something? Of course. Are you a widow? The question caught her by surprise, though she supposed she should have expected it. The title Mrs. combined with the fact that she was alone made it a logical assumption. Yes, my husband died 3 months ago in a mining accident. I am sorry for your loss. His voice was quiet and sincere. I lost my parents 2 years ago, so I know something about grief. It is not easy. No, it is not. If you do not mind my asking, how old are you? You seem young to be a widow. I am 22. James was 24. We were only married 8 months. He shook his head slowly. That is a hard thing. I am sorry you had to go through it. They sat in silence for a moment, and then he said, My name is Caleb Foster. I feel like we should move past Mr. Foster and Mrs. Franklin if we are going to be friends. Friends? She looked at him, surprised. I would like to be friends if you are agreeable to that. You are new in town, and I imagine you could use some. I know what it is like to feel alone. Theresa considered this. There was something about Caleb Foster that put her at ease, despite the strange flutter she felt whenever he looked at her. Maybe it was his straightforward manner, or the understanding in his eyes when he talked about loss. Whatever it was, she found herself wanting to know him better. I would like that, she said, and my name is Theresa. His smile was warm and genuine. Theresa, that is a pretty name. They talked for the rest of the social, discovering that they had more in common than Theresa would have expected. They were both 22, both orphans now, both trying to build lives in Centralia. Caleb told her about the ranch, about the challenges of running it alone, about his hopes to build up the herd and make the place profitable. Theresa found herself telling him about her work at the dress shop, about Martha and Henry's kindness, about slowly finding her footing in a new place. When the social ended and people started to leave, Caleb walked her outside. The January sun was already low on the horizon and the air was crisp and cold. Thank you for talking with me, he said. I enjoyed it. So did I. Would you mind if I called on you sometime? Maybe we could have supper at the hotel restaurant, or I could drive you out to see the ranch. Theresa hesitated. She liked Caleb, and she had enjoyed talking with him, but the thought of courting felt wrong. Too soon. Disloyal to James's memory. Caleb must have seen the conflict on her face because he said quickly, Just as friends, Theresa, nothing more. I'm not trying to rush you into anything. I just think it would be nice to have someone to talk to, and I imagine you might feel the same. Put that way, it seemed harmless enough. All right, as friends. Good. His smile lit up his whole face. How about next Sunday after church? We could have lunch at the hotel. That sounds nice. Over the next few weeks, Theresa and Caleb fell into a pattern. They would see each other at church on Sundays, have lunch or go for a walk, talk about their week. Theresa found herself looking forward to these meetings more than she wanted to admit. Caleb was easy to talk to, and he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He made her laugh with stories about the ranch and the various mishaps that came with trying to run a cattle operation single-handedly. He was also, she could not help but notice, devastatingly handsome. When he smiled, her stomach did somersaults. When his hand accidentally brushed hers, she felt a tingle all the way to her toes. She tried to ignore these feelings, tried to remind herself that they were just friends, but it was getting harder. In early February, Caleb invited her to see the ranch. "I promise it is not as impressive as it sounds," he said with a self-deprecating grin. "But I would like you to see it. It is a big part of my life." They rode out on a Sunday afternoon in his wagon. The ranch was about an hour from town, nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. It was beautiful country, wild and open, and Theresa felt something loosen in her chest as they drove through it. The ranch itself was modest. A small house, a barn, several outbuildings, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed. It was clear that Caleb was working hard to maintain the place. Everything was in good repair, the animals looked healthy, and there was a sense of order to it all. "My father built this house when he and my mother first married," Caleb said as he helped Theresa down from the wagon. "They started with nothing but a dream and a lot of hard work. I am trying to honor that." "It is a beautiful place," Theresa said sincerely. "You should be proud of what you have done here." He showed her around, introducing her to his favorite horse, a bay mare named Duchess, and pointing out improvements he wanted to make. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Theresa found herself getting caught up in his vision for the future. They had coffee in the small kitchen, and Caleb told her more about his parents. "They were good people," he said. "They loved each other deeply. That is one thing I always admired about them. Even when times were hard, and there were plenty of hard times, they never lost sight of what mattered. They had each other." "That is a beautiful legacy," Theresa said softly. "What about your parents?" Caleb asked. "You have not mentioned them much." "My mother died when I was 12. Influenza. My father raised me, but he was not an affectionate man. When he died 2 years ago, I did not mourn him the way I should have. Then I met James, and I thought I had found what I was looking for, a partner, someone to build a life with, and then you lost him." "Yes." Theresa stared into her coffee cup. "I love James, but I am not sure we had what your parents had. We did not have enough time to really know. We were still in that early stage where everything is exciting and new. I do not know what kind of love we would have built together if we had been given the chance." It was the first time she had articulated that thought, and saying it out loud felt both liberating and sad. She had been carrying an idealized version of her marriage in her heart, but the truth was more complicated. She had cared for James, but she was not sure she had been in love with him, not in the deep, enduring way that Caleb described his parents' love. "I think you would have built something good," Caleb said gently. "You are the kind of person who gives everything to what you do. I can see that in the way you work, the way you talk about things you care about." The way he looked at her when he said it made her heart race. This was more than friendship, she realized. This had become more than friendship for both of them, whether they were ready to admit it or not. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Theresa and Caleb continued to see each other. They had settled into a routine that felt natural and right. Caleb would come to town on Sundays for church and to take Theresa to lunch. Sometimes during the week, if he had business in town, he would stop by the dress shop to say hello. Mrs. Abernathy pretended to disapprove of the interruptions, but Theresa could see the hint of a smile on her face whenever Caleb appeared. One Saturday in late March, when the snow was finally beginning to melt and hints of green were appearing in the valleys, Caleb surprised Theresa by showing up at the shop just before closing time. "I know this is sudden," he said, "but I was wondering if you might like to go for a ride tomorrow. There is something I want to show you." "What is it?" "It is a surprise, but I promise you will like it." Theresa's trial period at the shop had ended the month before, and Mrs. Abernathy had offered her a permanent position with a raise to $10 a week. Life in Centralia had settled into a comfortable rhythm. She had friends now, a job she enjoyed, a place she was beginning to think of as home, And she had Caleb, whose presence in her life had become as essential as breathing. "All right," she said. "I trust you." The next day dawned clear and warm, the first truly spring-like day of the year. Caleb picked her up in his wagon, and they rode out of town heading west. They talked and laughed, easy with each other in a way that came from months of growing friendship, and something deeper that neither of them had named yet. After about an hour, Caleb turned the wagon onto a narrow track that led up into the foothills. They climbed higher, the horses working hard until they crested a ridge and Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. "Look," he said simply. Theresa looked and gasped. Spread out before them was a meadow, still brown from winter but dotted with the first wildflowers of spring. Beyond the meadow, the mountains rose in shades of blue and purple, their peaks still white with snow. A stream ran through the middle of the meadow, glinting silver in the sunlight. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "This is my favorite place in the world," Caleb said. "I used to come here with my father when I was a boy. He would bring me up here when I was feeling low or confused about something, and we would just sit and look at this view. He said it helped him remember that the world was bigger than whatever problem we were facing." He helped her down from the wagon and they walked to the edge of the meadow. The air smelled of pine and fresh earth and new growth. Birds sang in the trees. The stream burbled over rocks. "Thank you for bringing me here," Theresa said. "I feel honored that you wanted to share it with me." "Theresa," Caleb said, and something in his voice made her turn to look at him. He was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "I have something I need to say to you." Her heart started to pound. "What is it?" "These past few months, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has meant everything to me. I told myself we were just friends, that I was not looking for anything more, but I cannot pretend anymore." He took a step closer. "I am in love with you, Theresa. I think I have been since the first time I saw you in Mrs. Abernathy's shop. I know it might be too soon. I know you are still mourning your husband, but I could not keep it to myself any longer. You deserve to know how I feel." Theresa felt tears spring to her eyes. She had known this was coming, had felt it building between them, but hearing him say the words made it real and immediate and terrifying. "Caleb, She started, but did not know how to finish. "You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I am not asking you to feel the same way or to make any decisions. I just needed you to know. I will wait as long as you need. And if you can never return my feelings, if you want to stay friends, I will accept that too. I just want you in my life, Theresa, in whatever way you are comfortable with." She looked at this good, kind man who had opened his heart to her, and she knew what she had to say. The truth she had been avoiding for weeks now. "I am in love with you too," she said, and watched his eyes widen with hope and joy. "I have been fighting it because I felt guilty, like I was betraying James's memory. But the truth is, what I feel for you is stronger than anything I ever felt for him. That makes me feel terrible, like I am a horrible person, but it is the truth." "You are not a horrible person," Caleb said firmly. He reached out and took her hands in his. "You are allowed to move forward with your life. Your husband would not want you to spend the rest of your days mourning him. He would want you to be happy." "How do you know that?" "Because if I loved someone the way I love you, that is what I would want for them. Even if I could not be there, I would want them to find joy and love and a full life." Theresa felt the tears spill over and run down her cheeks. Caleb reached up and gently wiped them away with his thumbs, cradling her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as she responded. It was nothing like the chaste kisses she had shared with James. This kiss set her whole body on fire. This kiss felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. This kiss felt like everything she had been searching for without knowing it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you, Theresa. I want to build a life with you, but I will wait until you are ready. There is no rush." "I want that too," she said. "I want it more than I have ever wanted anything. But you are right, we should wait. Not because I have doubts, but because I want to do this right. I want to honor what we have by not rushing into it." "How long do you need?" She thought about it. "The anniversary of James's death is in September. After that, I think I will be ready." "Does that seem reasonable?" "That seems very reasonable." He kissed her again, soft and sweet. "I can wait until September. I can wait as long as you need." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the meadow, talking about the future they would build together. Caleb told her about his plans for the ranch, and Theresa shared her dream of maybe starting her own dressmaking business someday. They talked about children, and where they would live and what kind of life they wanted to create. As the sun began to set and they headed back to town, Theresa felt a sense of peace she had not known in a long time. The guilt was still there, a small voice in the back of her mind, but it was quieter now, drowned out by the certainty that what she felt for Caleb was real and right and worth pursuing. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Theresa and Caleb's courtship was the talk of Centralia, but in a gentle, approving way. Everyone seemed pleased that two young people who had both known loss were finding happiness together. Martha and Henry were delighted. Mrs. Abernathy permitted Theresa to leave work early on days when Caleb came to town, and Sarah Mitchell was thrilled to have a front-row seat to the romance. In June, Caleb took Theresa to meet some of his father's old friends at a neighboring ranch. In July, they went to a barn raising together and danced until midnight. In August, Caleb asked Theresa's landlord for permission to court her formally, a sweet old-fashioned gesture that made Theresa laugh and cry at the same time. September came with cooler weather and the first hints of autumn color in the trees. On the anniversary of James's death, Theresa visited the small cemetery on the edge of town and placed wildflowers on the grave of the stranger, buried there with James's name. She had written to James's family back in Pennsylvania and learned that they had already held a memorial service for him, so she did not feel the need to do anything elaborate. She just stood there for a few minutes, thinking about the young man she had married and the life they might have had together. "I hope you are at peace," she said quietly. "I hope you do not mind that I am moving forward. I think you would have liked Caleb. He is a good man like you were." She left the cemetery feeling lighter. The grief had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something softer, something she could carry without it weighing her down. That evening, Caleb came to take her to dinner. They went to the hotel restaurant, and after they had eaten, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Theresa Franklin, will you marry me?" It was not a surprise. They had been planning this for months, but hearing the question still made her heart soar. "Yes," she said, smiling so wide her face hurt. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. "It was my mother's," he said. "I know it is not fancy, but I thought you might like something with history and meaning." "It is perfect," Theresa said, looking at the ring through happy tears. "Everything about this is perfect." They set the wedding date for October, giving them just enough time to make preparations. Theresa made her own wedding dress, working on it in the evenings after the shop closed. It was a simple but elegant design in ivory silk, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Abernathy helped with the more complicated parts and seemed genuinely moved to be part of the process. Martha and Henry insisted on hosting a reception at their farm after the ceremony. Sarah offered to make the wedding cake. The whole town, it seemed, wanted to be part of their celebration. The wedding took place on a bright October morning, with golden leaves falling from the trees and a crispness in the air that promised winter was coming. Theresa walked down the aisle of the small church on Henry's arm, since she had no father to give her away. Caleb stood at the front, looking impossibly handsome in a new suit, his eyes shining with love and joy. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought their way. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife and Caleb kissed her, Theresa felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The reception at Martha and Henry's farm was a joyous affair. There was music and dancing, endless food and speeches that made everyone laugh and cry. As the sun began to set, Caleb took Theresa's hand and led her away from the crowd to a quiet spot by the barn. "Are you happy?" he asked, pulling her close. "I have never been happier," she said honestly. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for not giving up on me." "Thank you for taking a chance on me," he said. "Thank you for choosing to build a life with me." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the party continuing, but for this moment, they were in their own world. That night, they drove out to the ranch together as husband and wife. Caleb had spent the past few weeks fixing up the house, adding little touches to make it more comfortable. He had even bought a new quilt for the bed, a wedding present to his bride. He carried Theresa over the threshold, making her laugh. "I know it is not much," he said, setting her down gently. "But it is ours. We will build our life here together." "It is perfect," Theresa said, looking around the small house that was now her home. "It is absolutely perfect." Their first night as husband and wife was everything Theresa had hoped for and more. Caleb was gentle and patient, attentive to her needs and wants. What they shared was passionate but also tender, a physical expression of the deep love they felt for each other. Afterward, lying in his arms, Theresa thought about how far she had come from that desperate woman stumbling through the snow on Christmas Eve, looking for shelter. Christmas charity had given her one night's shelter in the Hayes' home. But this cowboy, this wonderful man sleeping peacefully beside her, had given her every night after. He had given her a home, a future, a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Theresa continued to work at the dress shop 3 days a week, partly because she enjoyed the work and partly because the extra income helped. The other days, she worked on the ranch, learning about cattle and horses and all the things that went into running a successful operation. She discovered she had a talent for the business side of things, keeping the books and managing accounts in a way that helped Caleb make better decisions about when to buy and sell. They made a good team. Where Caleb was strong and capable with the physical work, Theresa brought organization and financial acumen. Together, they began to turn the ranch into a thriving operation. In the spring, Theresa discovered she was expecting their first child. Caleb was overjoyed, already making plans to expand the house and build a proper nursery. Theresa cut back on her hours at the shop, and Mrs. Abernathy understood, having seen this coming. "You have been a blessing to me," the older woman said. "But your place is with your husband now, building your family. I will miss you terribly, but I am happy for you." Theresa promised to still take on special projects from home, embroidery work and custom designs that Mrs. Abernathy's new assistant could not handle. It was a good compromise that allowed her to stay connected to work she loved while focusing on her growing family. Their son was born in December, a week before Christmas. They named him Henry James Foster, honoring both the man who had helped save Theresa's life and her first husband. Little Henry was a healthy, robust baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's eyes. Caleb was a devoted father from the first moment. He would sit for hours just holding his son, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes, talking to him about the ranch and the future they would build together. Watching him with their baby made Theresa fall even more deeply in love with him, if that was possible. That Christmas, they hosted dinner at the ranch for Martha and Henry, Sarah and her husband, and a few other close friends. As Theresa looked around the table at the people who had become her family, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. A year ago, she had been a widow with nothing but grief and uncertainty. Now she had a husband she adored, a beautiful son, good friends, and a home full of love and promise. After dinner, when the guests had gone and the baby was sleeping, Theresa and Caleb sat by the fire watching the flames dance. "You remember when we first met?" Caleb asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Of course. You came into the shop with a torn coat." "I lied about that, you know." Theresa pulled back to look at him. "What do you mean?" "The coat was not torn. I ripped it deliberately so I would have an excuse to go to Mrs. Abernathy's shop. I had seen you through the window a few days before, and I wanted to meet you." Theresa laughed in surprise. "You did not." "Caleb Foster, you ripped your own coat just to meet me." "I did. I could not stop thinking about you. I had to find a way to talk to you." He grinned, looking not the least bit sorry. "Best decision I ever made." "You are ridiculous," Theresa said, but she was smiling. "Ridiculously in love with you," he agreed, and kissed her. The years that followed were full and rich. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Martha in honor of the woman who had taken Theresa in on that fateful Christmas Eve, and another son they named Caleb Jr. The ranch prospered under their careful management, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the area. Theresa never completely gave up sewing. She continued to take on special projects, and as the children grew, she taught Martha the art of needlework, passing on skills that had once saved her life. Henry grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Young Caleb was the quiet one, always with a book, and his parents encouraged his love of learning through it all. Theresa and Caleb's love only deepened. They had their share of challenges, as all couples do. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when the cattle prices were low and money was tight, the usual childhood illnesses and injuries that came with raising a family. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other and from the solid foundation they had built. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Theresa back to the meadow where he had first told her he loved her. The children were staying with Martha and Henry for the weekend, giving them rare time alone together. They stood at the edge of the meadow, now lush with summer growth and dotted with wildflowers, and Caleb pulled her close. "You have any regrets?" he asked. "About how everything turned out?" Theresa thought about the question seriously. She thought about James and the life they might have had. She thought about the grief and loss she had experienced. She thought about that desperate, freezing night when she had stumbled into a church looking for shelter, not knowing her whole life was about to change. "No regrets," she said finally. "Everything I went through, every hard moment, it brought me here, to you, to this life we have built. I would not change a single thing." "I love you, Theresa Foster," Caleb said, using the name that still sometimes surprised her even after all these years. "I love you too," she said. "Thank you for giving me a home, for giving me every night after that first one." "It has been my honor and my joy," he said, and kissed her under the wide Montana sky. 20 years after that Christmas Eve when Theresa had nearly died in the snow, she stood in the kitchen of the ranch house, preparing dinner for her family. The house had been expanded several times over the years, and now sprawled comfortably, with enough room for everyone, and then some. Henry was married now, to a lovely young woman from town, and they lived in a new house Caleb had helped them build on the north section of the ranch. They had given Theresa and Caleb their first grandchild the year before, a beautiful little girl. Martha was 19 and engaged to a young man who worked at the bank in Centralia. Young Caleb was away at university in Helena, studying to be a teacher. The ranch was more successful than Theresa had ever dreamed it could be. They employed several ranch hands now, and Caleb had become something of a mentor to young men looking to learn the cattle business. He was respected throughout the territory, known for his fair dealing and his skill with livestock. Theresa still took on sewing projects occasionally, though these days it was more for pleasure than necessity. She had taught several young women in town the finer points of dressmaking, and she took pride in knowing she had helped them develop skills that could support them. But mostly, she focused on her family and the ranch. She kept the books, managed the household, welcomed guests, and provided the steady, loving presence that made their house a home. As she worked, she heard Caleb's footsteps on the porch. A moment later, he came through the door, his hair now shot through with silver, his face more lined than it had been but still handsome to her eyes. He had been out checking on the cattle with Henry, and he looked tired but satisfied. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Smells good. What are we having? Beef stew and fresh bread. Your favorite. Everything you make is my favorite." He kissed her cheek. "How was your day?" "Good. I rode into town and visited with Mrs. Abernathy. She is finally thinking about retiring and closing the shop. She must be what? 80 now, 78, and still sharp as a tack. She told me she has been thinking about what to do with all her fabrics and supplies. She wants to know if I would be interested in taking some of it. Are you?" Theresa turned in his arms to face him. "I was thinking, what if we converted one of the spare rooms into a proper sewing room? I could take on more projects again, now that the children are grown. Maybe even teach classes for young women who want to learn. What do you think?" "I think that is a wonderful idea," Caleb said. "You have so much knowledge and skill to share, and I know you have missed the work." "I have," Theresa admitted. "I loved raising our children, and I would not trade that time for anything. But now that they are finding their own paths, I feel like I have room in my life for other things again." "Then we will make it happen," Caleb said simply. "Whatever you want, Theresa. Always." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, and Theresa marveled at how lucky she was. This man, this incredible man, had loved her faithfully for over 20 years. He had supported her dreams, raised children with her, built a life with her that was richer and fuller than anything she could have imagined. That night, after dinner was finished and the dishes were washed, they sat on the porch together watching the sun set over the mountains. It was late summer, and the air was warm and sweet with the smell of hay and grass. "You ever think about that Christmas Eve when we met?" Caleb asked. "Well, not when we met, but when you came to Centralia. All the time," Theresa said. "I think about how close I came to dying in that blizzard. How if I had not found the church, if Martha and Henry had not taken me in, none of this would exist. Our children would not exist. This life we have built would not exist." "Sometimes I wonder if it was fate," Caleb said. "Like everything that happened was leading you to me and me to you." "Maybe it was," Theresa said. "Or maybe it was just chance and we made the choice to build something beautiful out of it. Either way, I am grateful." "So am I," Caleb said. He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Every single day, I wake up grateful that I get to spend my life with you. Even when I am being stubborn, especially when you are being stubborn, it keeps life interesting." Theresa laughed and leaned against his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple to deep blue, and she thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. She had come to Centralia as a desperate widow with nothing but grief and a carpetbag. Christmas charity had given her shelter for one night in the home of strangers who became dear friends. But it was Caleb, this wonderful cowboy with the kind heart and the patient soul, who had given her every night after. He had given her a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that had sustained her through everything life had thrown their way. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Theresa sent up a silent prayer of thanks. For Martha and Henry, who had saved her life. For Mrs. Abernathy, who had given her a job. For this town that had welcomed her. For the children she had been blessed with. And most of all for Caleb, the cowboy who had walked into a dress shop with a deliberately torn coat and changed her life forever. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked softly. "How blessed I am," Theresa said. "How much I love you, how perfect this life is." "It is pretty perfect, is it not?" Caleb agreed. He stood and pulled her to her feet. "Dance with me." "There is no music, we will make our own." And so they danced on the porch under the stars, swaying gently to a melody only they could hear. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Inside the house, a clock chimed the hour. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. A coyote called to the moon. The world turned on its axis, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out across its surface. But here, on this ranch in Montana, in the arms of the man she loved, Theresa Franklin Foster had found everything she had ever needed. She had found home. She had found purpose. She had found love that would last all her days. Christmas charity had given her one night's shelter when she was at her lowest, desperate and alone in a blizzard. But this cowboy, this beautiful, wonderful man, had given her every night after, and would continue to give her every night for the rest of their lives together. And that, Theresa thought as she rested her head against Caleb's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, was the greatest gift of all. Years continued to pass, bringing more changes and more blessings. Martha married her banker and gave them 2 more grandchildren. Young Caleb finished university and returned to Centralia to teach at the local school, eventually becoming headmaster. He married a fellow teacher, a bright young woman who shared his love of learning. Henry and his wife took over more of the daily operations of the ranch, allowing Caleb and Theresa to slow down a bit, though Caleb could never quite give up checking on the cattle every day. Theresa's sewing room became a gathering place for young women in town who wanted to learn needlework, and she found joy in passing on her skills to a new generation. Martha and Henry Hayes lived well into their 80s, dying within months of each other, just as they would have wanted. At their funeral, Theresa spoke about how they had saved her life that Christmas Eve so many years ago, how their kindness had changed the course of her entire existence. There was not a dry eye in the church. Mrs. Abernathy passed away at the age of 85, leaving Theresa a small bequest in her will along with a note that said, "You were the best assistant I ever had, and more importantly, you became a dear friend. Use this to buy yourself something frivolous and beautiful. You have earned it." Theresa used the money to commission a stained glass window for the church, depicting the nativity scene. It was installed above the altar, where it caught the morning sun and cast rainbow patterns across the pews. Sarah Mitchell remained a close friend throughout the years. Her husband eventually bought the lumber mill, and they became one of the more prosperous families in town. But Sarah never forgot the young widow who had needed an affordable place to stay, and she remained down to earth and kind. On Theresa and Caleb's 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party. The whole town seemed to show up, filling the ranch house and spilling out onto the lawn. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and a few happy tears. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Theresa found herself standing on the porch again with Caleb, just as they had done so many times over the years. 30 years, Caleb said wonderingly. Where did the time go? Into building a life, Theresa said. Into raising children and running a ranch and making a home. Into loving you. Best 30 years of my life, Caleb said. Though I have to say, you are even more beautiful now than you were when I first saw you through that shop window. You are a terrible liar, Theresa said, but she was smiling. She knew she had aged. Her dark hair was streaked with silver now, and there were lines around her eyes and mouth. But Caleb looked at her like she was still that young woman who had caught his attention all those years ago. I am not lying, he insisted. You are beautiful because of all the life you have lived, all the love you have given. That kind of beauty does not fade. It only grows stronger. He pulled her close, and they stood there together, watching their grandchildren play on the lawn, their adult children talking and laughing with friends. This was the legacy they had built together. Not just the successful ranch or the respected position they held in the community, but this family, these relationships, this love that had spread out to touch so many lives. If you could go back, Caleb said quietly, to that Christmas Eve when you arrived in Centralia, if you could tell that frightened young woman what her life would become, what would you say? Theresa thought about it. She remembered that desperate, grieving widow stumbling through the snow, certain she was going to die. She remembered the fear and the cold and the terrible loneliness. I would tell her to hold on, she said finally. I would tell her that the worst night of her life is about to become the first night of something wonderful. I would tell her that kindness exists, that love is real, that life can surprise you in the best possible ways. I would tell her that everything is going to be all right. Better than all right. Everything is going to be beautiful. It has been beautiful, Caleb agreed. Every minute with you has been beautiful. They stayed on the porch until the last of their guests had gone and the stars were bright overhead. Inside, they could hear their children tidying up, their voices warm with laughter and affection. This was home. This was family. This was love that had been tested by time and found to be true. As they finally went inside, Caleb took Theresa's hand. It was a gesture as natural as breathing, something they had done thousands of times over 30 years of marriage. But tonight, it felt special somehow. A reminder that they had chosen each other and kept choosing each other day after day, year after year. Ready for bed? He asked. Ready for another night with you, Theresa said. And another after that, and another after that, for as many nights as God gives us. Every night, Caleb said softly. I will give you every night for as long as we both live. And he did. They had another 20 years together. Years full of joy and the occasional sorrow, of watching grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren arrive, of seeing the ranch prosper and the town of Centralia grow and change. They had years of quiet evenings on the porch and busy days full of work and laughter. They had years of being so comfortable with each other that they could communicate with just a glance, and years of still discovering new things to love about one another. When Caleb died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, Theresa was beside him, holding his hand just as she had held it countless times over the years. She grieved deeply, but she did not despair. How could she despair when she had been blessed with 50 years of marriage to the most wonderful man she had ever known? She lived another 8 years after Caleb passed, long enough to see all her grandchildren married and settled, long enough to hold several great-grandchildren in her arms. She kept the ranch going with Henry's help, refusing to give up the home she and Caleb had built together. On her last day, Surrounded by family, Theresa looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and she smiled. What a legacy they had created, she and Caleb. What a beautiful life they had built from such humble and desperate beginnings. "Tell me the story again, Grandma," one of her great-granddaughters asked, "about the Christmas blizzard and how you met Grandpa." And so Theresa told it one more time, the story that had become legend in their family. The story of a desperate widow stumbling through a blizzard, of finding shelter in a church, of Christmas charity and kindness from strangers. The story of a cowboy with a torn coat and a shy smile. The story of falling in love and building a life and proving that even the darkest nights can lead to the brightest dawns. "Christmas charity gave me one night's shelter," Theresa said, her voice soft but clear. "But your grandfather, that wonderful cowboy, he gave me every night after. Every single night for 50 years, and I would not trade a single one of them." Those were her last words. She closed her eyes that night and did not open them again, passing peacefully in her sleep, just as Caleb had. They buried her next to Caleb on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a big sky that stretched forever. At her funeral, the church was packed with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with friends and neighbors, with people whose lives she had touched over the years. The stained glass window she had commissioned in Mrs. Abernathy's memory cast colored light across the mourners, and the pastor spoke of a life well lived, of love freely given, of faith and courage and grace. But the most eloquent tribute came from her eldest son, Henry, now a gray-haired grandfather himself. He stood before the congregation and told the story of his mother, the young widow who had nearly died in a blizzard and instead found a new life. He spoke of her strength and her kindness, her skill with a needle and her head for business, her deep love for her family and her unwavering faith. And he spoke of the love she had shared with his father, a love that had been the foundation of everything good in their lives. "My parents taught us that love is a choice you make every day," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "They chose each other, and they kept choosing each other, through good times and bad, through prosperity and hardship, through joy and sorrow. They showed us what it means to build a life together, to honor your commitments, to love deeply and truly. That is the legacy they leave us. That is what we will carry forward." After the service, the family gathered at the ranch for a meal, as Theresa and Caleb would have wanted. The house was full of people and noise and life, just as it had been for so many years. And if the grief was there, so was the love and the gratitude for a woman who had taught them all what it meant to live well. On the hill overlooking the ranch, two simple headstones stood side by side. One read, "Caleb Foster, 1861–1933, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. He gave his heart to one woman and his life to the land." The other read, "Theresa Franklin Foster, 1861–1941. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She found shelter in kindness and built a home in love." Between the graves, someone had planted wildflowers, the same kind that grew in the meadow where Caleb had first declared his love. They bloomed every spring, a riot of color against the Montana grass, a living reminder of a love that had transformed two lives and created a legacy that would endure for generations. And every Christmas Eve, when the family gathered for dinner, someone would tell the story. The story of the blizzard and the church and the strangers who became family. The story of a torn coat and a shy smile and love that grew from friendship. The story of how Christmas charity gave Theresa Franklin one night's shelter, but Caleb Foster gave her every night after, and how those nights became a lifetime of love and joy and purpose. It was a story worth telling, a story worth remembering. A story that reminded everyone who heard it that even in our darkest moments, hope is possible, love is possible, redemption is possible. And sometimes, when we are lost and alone and stumbling through our own blizzards, all we need is one night's shelter to change the course of our entire lives. One act of kindness to open the door to everything we never knew we were searching for. That was the gift Martha and Henry Hayes gave to Theresa on that long-ago Christmas Eve. And it was the gift Theresa and Caleb gave to each other every day of their 50 years together. The gift of showing up, of choosing love, of giving every night, every day, every moment to the person who held their heart. It was, in the end, the greatest story any of them knew. A love story that began with charity and blossomed into something beautiful and lasting and true. A reminder that the best things in life often come from the hardest moments, and that love, real love, can heal even the deepest wounds and build something magnificent from the ashes of loss. The ranch still stands today, run now by Theresa and Caleb's descendants. The house has been added onto and modernized, but the heart of it remains the same. The hill where they are buried is a place of peace and remembrance, where family members go to think and pray and remember the couple who started it all. And every Christmas Eve, without fail, the family gathers. They eat and laugh and exchange gifts. They sing carols and tell stories. And always, always, someone tells the story of Christmas charity and the cowboy who gave every night after, keeping alive the memory of a love that changed everything and created something that will endure long after all of them are gone. It is a good story, a true story. A story of love conquering loss, of hope emerging from despair, of two people finding each other against all odds and building something beautiful that will echo through the generations. And it all started with one night's shelter on a cold Christmas Eve in 1883, in a small town in Montana, when kindness opened a door and love walked through.